Andy Hoyne, welcome. It's great to be with you.
Thanks for having me. It's a joy to be on the show.
You are a wealth of knowledge. Many of the buildings that we live in and we see pop up are not accidental. There is a big process behind that, and I want to dig in today with you. But maybe let's start off with the state of property development at the moment, particularly the markets that you work in. What are you seeing, and what's your vantage point telling you about the way we're developing brand new property?
We've been in the dark ages for the last 3 years. While 21 was a bumper year, 22, 23, and 24 have been three really tough years. So I'm quite excited to be surrounded by a whole lot of optimism right now for the first time in a while. And admittedly, I'm a bit glass half full. So I might be getting a bit ahead of the pack in some of the asset classes. And we work in everything from residential to from master plan, greenfield, middle ring, urban, super high end luxury. We're working on projects in Sydney that are 60 to 80,000 a square metre to up to 130,000 a square metre.
Well,
But, our Melbourne office, there's not a lot going on there. There's good things happening in Perth. Adelaide's picking up. Brisbane would be busier if only they could find a builder. I'm glad to be in Sydney, though we work in every state of Australia. We work in New Zealand, Singapore, China. We're working in America right now. And I think that every place is distinct and unique and every market follows the same. But in terms of asset classes in this country, I think there's so much support for residential in every typology and every asset class that we're heading in the right direction. And while commercial office is been very quiet post-COVID, the really kind of smart long-term developers are really thinking 3, 4, 5 years ahead from today. So I see good things evolving. Industrial is still reasonably strong. We are working with universities and hospitals. There's good investment in those asset classes where universities had none for a while. And mixed use is great, where we have all asset classes under one roof and retail has been quite buoyant. So generally speaking, I'd say that there's a lot to be optimistic about.
I love optimism. I'm so glad that we finally have someone that is optimistic, but give me the reasons why you're optimistic. What's triggering your optimism? Because if we look at funding costs, they're elevated, building costs are elevated, planning is a mess. Why is Andy Hoyne optimistic?
Firstly, I think while there's a lot you can always complain about with regard to what government's up to, I think federal government is doing a lot to push towards increase in housing. And we're talking about, social, affordable, but also market housing. I think state government is following suit or certainly has its own agenda where things are changing. They're taking control away from local councils where it's appropriate. We've really struggled with the sort of NIMBYism and the small-mindedness of a lot of councils, although there are some fantastic progressive councils out there. There's just not enough of them. So the planning processes are evolving, nowhere near quick enough. But what I'm seeing is because I work at the coalface with so many developers, they're moving. They're deciding that they're taking action. They're moving forward with projects that I've seen sitting dormant for 1, 2, or 3 years. And there's some financial support in terms of organizations who are getting behind them that might have been less inclined in recent years. And I think there's a belief that the market is going to have to kind of suck it up and accept the fact that the rate per square metre isn't what it used to be. There's a new paradigm in terms of a minimum. It is expensive. In fact, it's sometimes almost unrealistic, but we are certainly at the premium end, it's not an issue, and the investors are slowly coming back on board. So we're seeing those numbers.
I think I know why you're excited, because there's policy on the table around placemaking, around building around current infrastructure. Some in the real estate industry would prefer greenfield development, but the government's kind of come this way. And that's what you love, right? Because that's your whole notion of placemaking and the term which you've coined and you're now known for.
Well, we kind of developed this more commercialized version of placemaking, which we call place visioning. And it's really, while placemaking is about creating buoyant, engaging spaces for people, place visioning thinks a little bit more commercially to ensure that that investment is going to provide a return. So in every asset class, it's about understanding who are the audiences and what can we do to provide a great experience for them. And that actually ultimately has an impact on the asset value, particularly for developers who are holding assets in various sectors. The good thing over the last 10 years is that the development industry has really come on board to see the financial impact that placemaking can have, both in terms of positioning a product, the sales or the leasing process, and again, the end value. And government used to think very differently about this notion of placemaking because it was a bit kumbaya. It was a bit, oh, it's nice to have a pretty park and some park benches. And while I'm all for all that sort of amenity, those experiences, and those things that are provided at absolutely no cost, we do have to think about who's paying for it and what sort of return should they expect. And I do believe that government should see a return. They should see a return in increased health, in sort of decrease in things like loneliness, and all of those things ultimately impact what governments spend, through hospitals and through other interventions. So big picture, when you actually take people on a journey and give them the things they need through amenity, convenience, access to opportunity, that really does have a holistic, big picture effect where ultimately we are talking about billions of dollars.
What are the most important elements in placemaking for you? If we were to summarize the top three things, and I know summarizing to a number doesn't give it justice, but just for simplicity, what are the top 3 or 4 things that are non negotiables that are the most important ingredients in placemaking for you?
So I'll quickly list a few that are always important to consider, and they change depending on whether we're looking at greenfield, middle ring, inner urban, or whether we're looking at mixed use where maybe commercial office is dominant or whether it's residential. But there are a few that are consistent, and I think that the public realm is incredibly important. Now, while I come from a marketing and branding background, I don't really care about logos. I just don't care. What I care about is the experience that people have, and that's the brand. When you arrive at a place and you're engaged and it feels exciting and there's things to do and there's lots of people and there's buoyancy, because buoyancy equals safety, then that ground plane, that public realm is what drives that outcome. People don't look to the second floor or the 50th floor. That's for the tenants or the residents. So public realm is something that you need to always give an enormous amount of consideration to. But in terms of tenants, you need grocery, you want sort of small scale retail, you need amenity. Now, amenity can be a whole host of different things that are a lot of free experiences, a lot of free things that people can kind of get access to. But actually, retail is also amenity and grocery is also amenity. Green spaces are incredibly important. We can actually, and it's not necessarily these need to be out in greenfields developments. Great green spaces, even if they're small scale in inner urban areas, provide an enormous amount to people, families, and visitors. But I have to say that, and I could probably give you a list of 20, 30, 40 things. The thing that I'm always most keen to see everywhere I go, the number one thing that we have a limited ability to impact in the short term, but ideally in the long term, is public transport. Public transport is the thing that enables people to get access to jobs, access to education. Public transport is what true equity looks like, regardless of the price point that you're talking to. And I'm really excited to see, state governments, say in Victoria and New South Wales, really pushing hard to develop these TODs, these priority precincts around train stations, because that's where we should be developing at real scale, at enormous density. Density for me is not a dirty word at all. I love density. I think density is what enables people to actually have access to everything on my bucket list. And coming from someone who lives in Surrey Hills with a wife and 3 kids, and we're surrounded by a reasonable amount of density, we get all the privileges and the benefits of that. The walkability, the health, the ability to actually connect with your community. My brother lives in Melbourne in an outer ring suburb, and he thinks that that's the ideal lifestyle. And I'm happy for him. But he's lived there for decades and he still doesn't know most of his neighbors. I know everyone in my street. It's this assumption of you live in a sort of dense urban environment, you'll know no one. But I find that the opposite is true. And I find that these dense urban environments are really where incredible community gets created, but not just in a cookie cutter way that a whole bunch of people like me. I'm friends with my 80-year-old neighbor and my 20-year-old neighbor. I feel it's less about where you come from, what you dress like, or what maybe music you're into. And it's this kind of different type of connectivity that you get in an urban environment that you really wouldn't get in a more dispersed greenfield master plan. So again, TODs, as an investor as well, I don't think I'd ever buy an investment that wasn't near public transport, because the capital growth is stronger. Whether I have a tenant in there or whether, somebody's living there as an owner occupier, just that ability to access, look at Sydney and the investment in the metro. It's been a game
It's
changer.
amazing.
It's completely transformed this city. And I'm excited about the way people look at public transport, because since the opening of the metro, we now have a couple of 100,000 more people using public transport
Wow.
than used to. I mean, that's just phenomenal. How many cars does that take off the road? What impact does that have on the environment and sustainability, and let alone the gridlock that we all face on those occasions we do get into the car? So if we're able to give people more access, more opportunity, and more ability to make more choices, that impacts how they can actually earn wages, and actually impact their own trajectory in terms of things like education.
Adam Geha, who's a friend of ours from EG Funds, said something once on a podcast that really resonated with me. He said, real estate is a network asset. And that's the network that you're talking about, right? The bigger the network, the more nodes in a lot of things in life, whether it's in technology or it's in physics, the more nodes to a network, the more valuable the network becomes.
Mm.
Tell me a little bit about that and how that fits in with what you just said, and how compounding or growing makes a place nicer and more desirable.
So often people think about, public transport nodes as the destination, but for me, they're a network. And a good example of that is, let's say that you work in the city, and you live 20 stops out or 10 stops out. You don't necessarily need to just get on the train and go from A to B. There's A, B, C, D, E. You can stop halfway, jump off the station, look at what effect the metro has had in North Sydney. People now will stop off at North Sydney, go to Victoria Cross, have a beer or a bite to eat, and get back on the metro. It all takes 2 minutes. And so now what we have is this quick ability to just jump on and jump off. I'd love to see an asset class be developed in some of these nodes, which we don't see anywhere enough of, and that's entertainment.
Mm.
Now, great to have jobs, great to have access to more, and I'd like to see more education. Yes, commercial office and residential, without a doubt. But the more diversity we have in asset classes, the more dynamic it makes it, the more we are able to engage various different audiences. And what I mean by that is, when you just have, say, a commercial office precinct, it's business people in ties and suits Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. But when you have students, you actually start to create a nighttime economy. And when you actually engage families, you actually start to create a weekend economy. When you have residents, you get to fill in all the gaps. So, and when you have hotels, you actually get to attract visitors. So the more asset classes we have, the more we're able to create safer spaces 7 days and nights a week. And when I think about train station and that idea of equity, I think compound, or as Albert Einstein says, the eighth wonder of the world is compound interest. And so while, from a simple mathematics formula, we can kind of look at this idea of compounding interest and think, what sort of effect does that have? And I love that kind of notion that if you invested 1% per day, that at the end of a year of 365 days, what you would have is 37.7. Now, 1% a day financially is probably quite a lot, but 1%, not just in money, but 1% in your education, in your knowledge, in your relationships. Imagine just making 1% more extra effort in your marriage or the way that you engage your kids. That compound interest, that growth on growth on growth. And that investment, whether it is financial or elsewhere, has such a profound ability to change the world we live in, if only people would really accept the value of it. And if I think about placemaking or property development or the engagement of spaces, all of us and our ability to invest in those experiences with a stranger or with a friend actually makes these places more buoyant and more valuable in terms of the community impact, but also valuable from a financial point of view.
I think one of the challenges with transport oriented development or going up around these nodes is that it's expensive. It becomes unaffordable. It's all very well to build near a metro, but when they come to deliver the product to market, there's only a certain number of people. Where does social housing or the social element come into placemaking, and what are we doing good, or what do we need to be doing better?
Nobody wants to live in a monoculture. Like anyone who's super wealthy that just wants to live with wealthy people, they should move to America because that's what they cater for. And America is appalling on public transport. The New York metro system accounts for 50% of all public transport in the entire country of the USA. So the USA likes and supports you if you're wealthy. If you're not, it couldn't give two shits about you. That's not a great society and it's not a great culture. And I don't think that's what Australia aspires to be. I think, we've had some incredible governor generals in the past of Australia who have really looked to figure out how we can fix homelessness and people living in different socioeconomic environments. And that is partly through housing, or especially through housing, and partly through education. I don't want to participate in developments that only consider, certainly at scale developments that just consider wealthy people. A great society needs housing, social and affordable housing, and that means people from all walks of life. Government needs to encourage development by actually providing, better FSRs or uplift to actually mitigate the challenge from a financial point of view. We have a situation here in New South Wales where state government is enabling uplift of 30% if there's, 30% affordable housing. Brilliant. We need a whole lot more of that. Admittedly, it means developers have to go back to the drawing board to rethink the scheme and make sure it can actually stack up. And it can in some cases and not in others. But certainly, in TOD environments, it makes the most sense of all spaces, especially if we're trying to invest in education in the same places. So it doesn't just mean I want people to get on trains or multiple train station stops every day. I'd still like to see more of everything in each of these nodes so you actually don't have to use public transport at all. The ideal neighborhood or the ideal community is one that's walkable. It's one that you don't ever get in a car and you don't need transport full stop, but you do need access to it. So for me, affordable housing is critical. At the very bare minimum, from a key worker point of view, like we need housing for people who do all the jobs that aren't necessarily people in professional services who aren't earning the wages. And right now, it just doesn't stack up. Young people don't see a future. And we need to change that so we can actually create opportunity where there is a product that has a price point that meets people's needs.
Which countries or which cities do it better than us, and who can we learn from? Because I know you travel a lot, you have a global lens and perspective. Who is the inspiration out there?
I think for a lot of things, when it comes to creating an equitable society, we're always looking at those Nordic countries. Where we're looking at, Sweden and Norway and a whole host of sort of Northern European countries that have probably had that social fabric for generations. And they've kind of built walkability and equity and rent controls and affordable housing into the policy that has now just become an expected framework. I think Australia is a long way from that, but I think that there's a desire to get closer. So we do need massive policy changes, but it shouldn't be at the expense of, landlords or developers. I think they need to be part of the journey and part of the process of understanding how that can actually still be a commercial proposition for an organization. Organizations that, to your point, right now are experiencing massive wage growth, cost of goods growth, materials growth. And one of the things that really frustrates me is, while we look at the enormous cost of delivering housing in this country, it's often forgotten that between 25 and 40% of everything that a consumer pays for housing actually goes to government. There are, the state government, local government, federal government. Oh my God, they're grabbing with both hands, and they've gotten used to doing it for a very long time, and they don't know how to get their nose out of the trough. They have been helping themselves to, imposts, levies, fees, contributions at so many levels during the process. They can complain about housing, yet they're the biggest impediment to affordability. I just think about running a business in this country, contributing to payroll tax. I mean, it's almost criminal what government
Yeah.
forces us as businesses to pay because we employ people. It's complete madness. You could go through a year of your organization, and certainly, these GFC years, many organizations have, where they'll get to the end of a financial year, they'll make no profit. They've worked probably double time just to get to the end of the year.
Yeah.
But many have paid hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in payroll tax on top of all the other Medicare levies and all the other taxes and superannuation that employees don't even notice. They don't even know exists. Unless you're a business owner who pays payroll tax, most people don't even know anything about it. You have to explain it to them. And so, again, it's just another one of those things that government have almost forgotten. They help themselves to stamp duty. And it's interesting to see the debate occurring right now, the alternative to, a different sort of tax-based system. And it'll be interesting what happens over the next few years as to those policy changes actually being implemented.
What about in Asia, places like Singapore? We were there in October and we loved it. You feel social cohesion. They do development well. It's a beautiful society to live in. As a tourist, that was my vantage point. Are they a model for us, or Japan, for example? Because we are increasingly tied to Asia. The developers in the capital are Asian focused. Where can we look at in Asia as inspiration?
You probably hit the nail on the head. I do think Singapore is a benchmark for inclusivity in terms of the sort of almost autocratic government doing an incredible job over many decades and consistently thinking about housing and this idea of equity. Singapore has a really good model around housing and tax, and we could certainly learn an enormous amount from Singapore in this country. And the reality is, we are in Asia Pacific, and for many incredible neighborhoods that you could visit in all of our capital cities, we are seeing huge growth in an Asian population, in an Indian population. This is a reality of our country, and we should not just acknowledge it, we should welcome it. Australia has always been an incredibly welcoming society, but like all parts of the world, we do have racism. There is a huge amount of work that goes into trying to mitigate and stamp that out. It'll probably always exist, sadly, but I think that we need to encourage growth in our country, and we need to encourage more multiculturalism, and not just monocultures. I'm not suggesting that neighborhood should be African, that should be Vietnamese, and that should be Lebanese. I love it when we have real and true integration. And I think that you see that best in schools when you actually visit, schools, primary, secondary, or otherwise, and you actually see these multicultural communities. No one's talking about whether they have Greek heritage, Russian heritage, or Asian heritage. They're all Australian in their own eyes, as it should be. Even if they've just arrived, being Australian is not about which country you're born on and what color your skin is. It should be a way of life about being inclusive and celebrating multiculturalism, because we get so many benefits from it, let alone the kind of food choices that we have here. And I think that that's something we should invest more in as a country.
I think one of my favorite things is the book, The Place Economy. Lockie, I'm going to put it up if we can get a close up while I ask Andy about this journey. This is volume 3. Is it? Tell us a little bit about this, the book, the firm, more about life at Hoyne and what this encompasses for you.
So the place economy was born out of a frustration that I was seeing developments occur that I didn't feel at the time really gave any consideration to the surrounding community. It was just about selling stock. My view is that you need to actually mitigate the concerns of a community, even if they're not ever going to be buyers or visitors or use the spaces. They need to see that development actually adds value to their lives, that even if it's just physical beauty, but ideally, for those larger scale developments, it is public realm and spaces. And so I wanted to take a more optimistic view that there are incredible developments being delivered in Australia and around the world. And I wanted to focus and amplify those benchmark case studies as examples of what else could be done as a starting point. And I have felt that over the last 10 years, through the 3 books that we've published, that we have had an incredible impact. I get reached out by people, by experts, by renowned high-profile people all over the world on a regular basis. And sometimes I'm lucky enough to speak at conferences or have conversations with these people. But the exciting thing for me is when developers and people in government say, wow, we've learned so much from reading your books. And don't get me wrong, I'm not the one teaching them. I'm the one who learns so much by talking to other people. So I'm on the same journey of learning. But the most recent book, Volume 3, has really tried to just look at and uncover some of the insights in different themes that I hadn't uncovered in volumes 1 and 2. And again, they are both social and economic, because it's about the social and economic benefits that great placemaking delivers. It delivers and mitigates the challenges, the huge challenges that developers face and their investments and the risks that they take, but it also mitigates the challenges that local and state governments face in terms of their investments and their ability to engage with communities and actually provide better experiences for them in their lived environment. And so for me, the place economy has been a great journey in terms of speaking to people who have come back to me and said, we've read it, we've shared it, and we've actually implemented huge amounts of the learnings, and it's changed the way we operate as businesses, the way we think about profit. And I want organizations to make great profits. And while that part of the society we live in will have a negative stigma around some property developers because they think they make too much profit, what they don't see is the huge number of people that make no profit and go bankrupt and risk everything. So it's an incredibly difficult industry to be successful in, let alone to be successful decade after decade. But I have really enjoyed seeing organizations improve or change behavior and see the impact that they have on the communities and the cities that they are responsible for shaping. Government can create policy, government can provide frameworks, but government can do a good job when they are engaging with the right organizations to get the hell out of the way and let private enterprise deliver benchmark livable experiences that impact and shape better cities.
Last question. It's my favorite question. What have you learned about yourself as a leader, particularly having come out of a rough period in this industry? What's Andy Hoyne learned?
The older I get, the less I know. I kind of laugh at myself and think, oh my God, if I only knew today, if I only knew a decade or 2 decades ago what I know today, the more I learn, the more I realize there's more to learn. And you're just scratching the surface. I'm probably more inclined to ask advice in a way that I wouldn't have done decades ago. I always thought it was a badge of honor to kind of go with your gut feeling and just make a decision and get on with it. And while there is value to doing that, I think in a lot of instances, it pays dividends to pause and ask an expert. And while you may have experience in a certain field or you may have been exposed to it over a period of time, I really enjoy asking people who are at the coalface of it and at both ends of the spectrum. And I probably do have this both community and commercial lens. I go to places and I walk the streets and I speak to people and just ask them questions. And I say, if you were mayor, what would you do to this suburb or this town? What would you love to see? And if you had no budget, what do you think would actually change the fabric of this place to enable people to have a better life? But at the other end of the spectrum, and speaking to developers who are constantly racked with this fear of time and money. And I realize that when you delay something or someone like myself turns up and says, look, we need to solve these problems. We need to come up with some good ideas or solutions before you forge forward. And they're thinking, oh my God, that time, that delay is costing me money. And I appreciate and accept that that is true. However, by pausing for a moment and actually speaking to the right people at every end of the spectrum and actually listening and learning, we will always come up with better ideas that ultimately add to the value of these developments we're delivering. And value, again, both in experiences and in understanding our audiences and what their needs are, but value in terms of the rates being charged for in sales or for leasing and the asset values at completion. And I'm absolutely convinced that this is true because everywhere I go in the world, the best developments, the benchmarks places that win all the awards have done exactly that. And admittedly, it's taken them lessons to learn that too. They've made many mistakes, but they've stopped, learned, and listened. And I think that if we all do that, we're actually going to collectively create cities that are real legacies that we can be proud to have contributed to.
Well, Andy, thank you very much for your leadership. Thank you for your authenticity. Thank you for being a voice, for your optimism, and for creating a lot of these beautiful communities that we walk around and see. And thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much. I love these conversations, and I love the idea that there are people out there listening and hopefully being inspired to read books like The Place Economy and listen to the leaders who are really working hard in a most considered manner to actually shape better society. So thanks for having me.
Thank you.